Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and in this video we're going to be rolling on Kickstarter for October 2019. You may have noticed that I skipped over September 2019. Got a lot of flack for that, just joking, but actually got a number of different messages of people wondering where that video was. I do apologize. September was a crazy month, not only on Kickstarter, but just on the channel in general, and the amount of videos that I was putting together, so I didn't actually have the time to put together this rolling on Kickstarter segment, which I do apologize for because some people were looking for that. But I'm here in October and there are just as many exciting projects to take a look at from a solo capacity this month. So without further ado, let's start with the very first one. So we'll start things off here with Tiny Epic Dinosaurs. This is a 1 to 4 player game, so right out of the gates this is solo playable. If you're looking for a game that has dinosaurs, worker placement, 45 minutes to play, it says it's easy to learn, then this might be exactly what you're looking for. And one other thing to note about the Tiny Epic series is that this has been going on for quite some time. So this is the first time you've ever seen a Tiny Epic game. There are a lot more than just the one here on Kickstarter that are inside that library. So you can quickly do that by checking Gameland Games, actually their site, or just coming here and then clicking on 22 Created. From here, you can actually see all the previous Kickstarters for them. You've got things like Ultra Tiny Epic Galaxies. Again, this was a more recent Kickstarter that basically took the original Galaxies and kind of amped it up. You've got Tiny Epic Tactics, Tiny Epic, I can't even say it. There's so many tongue twisters in there. Tiny Epic Mix. Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea from them was actually a totally different thing. They basically went ahead and created a area control miniatures game, which is a full-size game with many boxes, many expansions. Very different than what they do typically by jamming a lot of content into a really tiny box is what they're known for. But these item meeples are something that they just started doing within the last handful of them. And that's just a real cool trademark thing by them, which is just some really interesting meeples that are interchangeable with the items that you find within the game. So they're meeples, items, they call them item meeples. You kind of get the picture. So it's an interesting design because it allows for you to kind of customize the character that you're actually using. So for instance, the last one that I played actually was this one right here, Tiny Epic Quest. And this was, I believe, the first time that was ever brought in. And so you can see here they had like shields and swords and spell books. So if you actually had those items equipped, you clip those things on you to let other players know what you've got. It just was a really cool visual representation on the table. There's a whole bunch of these, so you can really go after whichever theme you're looking for, and almost all of them, as you can see, are 1 player to 4 players, so you got the solo aspect there. So this is kind of a high-level skim over this particular project, because overall, this particular project actually is very common for this company, as they do these quite often, as you've seen. So we'll give you a couple shots here of some of the artwork within the game, and then we'll move into some of the actual phases of the game. So they got like phase 1 right here, and they have some videos here explaining the different phases and how they work. Again, it's worker placement, so if you like that style of a game, then you're going to kind of dig this, and you're going to be probably asking some questions as to whether or not this fits what you're looking for. But if you're not into worker placement, then you're probably going to be running away. So either way, you kind of have your options there. But again, when I look at something like this, I see in my mind something like Dinosaur Island or Dinogenics, and I think of a smaller scale version of this, something that's more pocket friendly, more filler, that type of thing. Now, I have played some of these tiny epic games before with more players than just one, and sometimes they can creep up over an hour quite easily. So even though it seems like a game that could be considered a filler game because of its small box size, it's actually quite deceiving in that there's a lot of game actually packed into that box. And if you're playing with 4 players, it can actually go a typical game length. So it's just kind of like an hour and above. So it's actually kind of surprising how much they managed to jam in there. But again, if you go ahead and pick this up on Kickstarter, you're going to have all those goodies added in. You got like representations for all the dinosaurs and things like that. So pretty cool overall. So a good, and again, with all the different themes that they have, you really can pick and choose which one you want to go after. You've got your solo gameplay area here talking about the automata cards, if I'm saying that correctly. The 2 double-sided rival ranch mats are here. And you've got a laboratory expansion. I can barely speak today, but yeah, whole bunch of things here. Of course, you got your playthroughs, so you can check that out in order to find out. Although I don't think there's any solo playable stuff in there, so that's kind of a miss. That's one thing that would have been really cool, is if they had actually got some people to cover the solo side of the game, because I think that is a large subset of the Kickstarter culture that is missed on occasion. It's definitely recommended to have in there. So, besides all that, although there are a bunch down here hiding, so maybe I spoke too soon. I forgot about this pile of videos, but I don't believe any of these guys are covering the solo side of the hobby. So, I guess my quote comment still stands, but that would be a really good thing to cover, being that this can be played at the one-player level. So anyway, really cool overall. This is one I recommend for sure to check out. Again, it hinges on whether or not you already have a bunch of these. There are some people out there that literally pick up every single iteration of these things because of the price point for them. They're so cheap. That's the other thing that's really nice about them. They're about $20 to pick this game up, which is, again, most board games on Kickstarter do not go for $20. So that's another reason why a lot of people just pick up every single one. But that's just more of a collection mentality. If you're into it because you're actually into the game and you think you're going to get some gameplay out of this and not just have it sit on your shelf, 20 bucks is pretty good, and you'll probably get your money's worth quite easily. So that is enough for Tiny Epic Dinosaur. It is doing quite well. Again, I'm in Canada, so you can see the Canadian currency there, but converted over to US, 256,000 and 7,000 backers. Definitely nothing small in that regard. Next up, we have Time of Legends Joan of Arc 1.5. This comes from Mythic Games, and this is another iteration of a very, very successful prior Kickstarter from Mythic Games. You take a look at their prior catalog of games that they have pumped out in the past. Again, I do this regardless of the individual pushing the game out because it's always fun to see what their prior projects were. They've got a lot of successful ones. Mythic is certainly not a small player in the board game world anymore. They got things like Super Fantasy Brawl. They got all kinds of great stuff. Solomon Kane's another really highly anticipated one by myself, as this has a lot of solo playable potential with this. And Time of Legends Joan of Arc, the original one, is sitting right here. This original Kickstarter was massive. You can see there was 9,000 backers, almost 10,000 really, and then over $2 million. Like craziness. It was a huge Kickstarter, but overall, this Kickstarter still has a really strong support in terms of the backer numbers, even though the dollars are not in the same realm as the prior one, because a lot of people coming back are picking up additional content. That's what's been added into this, is that of course you're going to have the ability to go ahead and pick up the stuff that you didn't have the first time, but you can also pick up new content for the people coming in for the very first time. Plus you get stretch goals, so of course that's going to add more options into things. You got things like villages and stuff like that have popped up here, and you got walls, I guess, that have popped up recently, like all kinds of stuff in there, and scenarios. You always want to see more scenarios for a game this size. If we keep on going through, again, this is going to be one of those games that's going to kind of hit people differently depending on the angle that they're coming into it. So the one thing I'll say is it's a game that if I head to the FAQ, this question right here will answer your major question probably in your mind, is what's going on with the co-op and solo side of it? What's the heart of this thing? Well, given the nature of the game, this is written by them, solo rules are not something we will be doing as a general style of play. However, a small number of scenarios are written specifically for co-op and solo play. So in other words, it's not a major focus of the game, but there are scenarios out there you can play. And I know of some expansions within the game that have those types inside of them. And that, to me, is what I'm going to be focusing on, even just to learn the game, to get better at it, so I can teach it better, all that kind of stuff. But you have to go into this one knowing that you're not going to go ahead and find a game that's strictly solo and co-op playable. That's not their major focus, at least yet. I don't know if, and they've already began branching this, Time of Legends brand off, and we'll see that shortly. There's another iteration of this game, not the miniature scenario-driven side of it, but more of an RPG side of it that we'll talk about later on. But they've already started to kind of branch out with this, realizing the success behind it. So you just never know when they might come at it from a solo or co-op perspective in the future, potentially adding more to it. You also have the ability with some of these Kickstarters to bring in things like a digital scenario creator, which is pretty awesome. So the ultimate way to join the community. So basically you share your own scenarios, and that to me is the doorway into taking what scenarios and rules have already been established officially for solo and co-op, and then having passionate individuals come in and just blow the doors open in terms of what can be done. And the crazy thing is, There's other games out there, especially on Board Game Geek, where this has actually led to something official. So in other words, if the content created by the community that loves the game so much is able to do so successfully, and even the creators of the game are impressed by it, as well as Mythic Games, things like that. For example, there's potential that that stuff could become official at some point, or that they could start trying to branch into that market of the side of, at least in terms of solo gamers, which I think would be huge, because a game like this actually would attract, I think, a lot of people. The biggest key, though, going into this one is that it, like many miniature games, is there's a lot of content. So you're going to pick up something like a core game here, you're going to be looking at a lot of different pieces to add to that. You can see here from the original Kickstarter, there was a ton of stuff, and all this stuff showed up in two different ways on my doorstep. So essentially the first wave was basically this, front section. Second wave was basically this, and they were two humongous shipments. There's a lot of boxes, and I will have to consolidate all these boxes down, but the artwork's so beautiful, I'm having such a hard time doing that. But long story short, there's a lot of content here already. So again, as with most miniature-based games, especially combat games like this, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to decide how you want to go about it. So if you're interested in this in terms of a solo or co-op capacity, you're going to want to go after like the core game. You're going to want to go after expansions like this one here that I have highlighted on screen, or at least I'm pointing to anyway, the Nova one. That one has some solo and co-op in it. The best way to know for sure, especially from the original Kickstarter, is go back to that original Kickstarter, because they actually specify which ones are which. I believe in here, I don't think that they have them listed. No, they don't. So they don't have any kind of mention of solo and co-op breakdown, at least that I remember on the front of this actual Kickstarter here, but in the prior one they mention it quite a bit, and there might be something here in the FAQ that I missed, in order to determine which ones have solo and co-op, or I might actually be thinking with the prior Kickstarter. So either way, this is one worth mentioning because it kind of touches on a different element of what a solo gamer might be interested in. Not all solo gamers are into, every game has to be solo-centric to its core, and that's the thing. For me, that's like 99% of the games I own. I own 3 games that are not, centric around solo play. In other words, they weren't built in from the ground up. And that's Legion, for instance, Star Wars Legion. I have some of that. I haven't gotten all of it, but I've got a good chunk of it. Just because I enjoy Star Wars and it's fun to kind of get that to the table with friends. This Time of Legends was another fantasy-based miniature game that I was interested in. Again, it was, in my opinion, it's one of those games that comes around once every 5 years. There's one of these really epic miniature games that I just can't get away from because it's just so cool, at least to me anyway. And so to give it a shot to see whether or not it has staying power is kind of why I went with this one. And then the other one was Fallout Wasteland Warfare. It's another one, and I really enjoy the IP, and it just so happens the game is not just an IP wrapped, miniature game. It has solo and co-op play in its core from the ground up. The designers built the game around it. So it has actually, out of the 3 miniature games, Legion, Joan of Arc, and Fallout Wasteland Warfare, Wasteland Warfare actually has the most core-centric solo play built in from the ground up, and is the best choice if you are just planning on playing a miniature game solo. But if you like playing a game 2-player and also like the ability to play it solo or co-op on the side so you can get it off the shelf, Time of Legends is something worth looking into. I wouldn't recommend Legion because Legion doesn't have kind of the rule set behind it to be deep enough, but the fact that Joan of Arc has the official rules for solo and co-op, that's what we're talking about. So I thought I'd just kind of mention that, give you a high-level overview of a couple example other miniature games out there that I'm kind of into. Those are the 3 really, because again, you can only go down so many of those rabbit holes with miniature games in terms of the combat-centric ones before, it just starts costing a lot of money. And really, they also take up a lot of space. Space is another thing that a lot of people don't have all kinds of, or they want to be able to have lots of other games in the space of those miniature games. So, long story short, am I happy with this? When it arrived, I haven't actually started unboxing some of this stuff on the channel, but I plan to unbox the ones that are specific to solo play. I think that's how I'm going to go about it, so that I can keep everyone's interest on the core pieces of, this line of products that actually has co-op and solo play, so that if you, need to make an informed decision on whether you're interested, you're only seeing the stuff that actually has that in it, because that's what we focus on here. So, long story short, just wanted to show you the game. If you've never seen it before, certainly have to be interested in the theme and the backstory and everything else. There's different angles to tackle it. You can go after it from a historical vantage point. You can go after it kind of within a, kind of like the end of the world, devils and angels battling it out, that type of thing. So you can kind of go either way or both. And who knows how else they'll expand this in the future, but this was one that's absolutely worth mentioning. There's only 16 hours left, so I'm certainly not giving you much time to think about it, and I do apologize for that. Next up, we have Time of Legends Destinies. This is a narrative, app-driven, RPG-like board game experience like no others. This is what it says right on the Kickstarter page itself, and you can see down the bottom left-hand corner of the video here, it says Lucky Duck Games. You can see it right here. Lucky Duck Games is actually partnered up with Mythic Games, of course, because this is set in the world of Joan of Arc. And this is, again, where I go, I wonder how much this Joan of Arc thing is going to expand and branch off. Because once you start talking about narrative, app-driven RPG game experiences, you start thinking, what are the solo capacities for this? What could potentially be done? And that's what gets me excited. Again, another reason to say, it might be worth diving into this. And that was another thing that, again, recently came out. No one knew going into the first Kickstarter for Joan of Arc that this would ever be a reality. But what's crazy is that Lucky Duck Games and Mythic have agreed to kind of come together and put this product out there. And knowing Lucky Duck's success with Chronicles of Crime, which the mechanisms and the expansion into kind of the 3D realm of using glasses on top of your phone in order to see crime scenes and stuff like this. I don't know what's coming over 100% based off this Kickstarter, but the Kickstarter does specify that the game is obviously app-driven. We're going to see pictures and videos on screen here in a second. This is what's really exciting about the game because it has so much of a weird cross vibe of like, I look at the middle of the table and I think seventh continent, like in terms of like, where you're moving stuff, but it doesn't have the same type of iconography or mechanisms at all. It just looks like that from a distance. And then I look at the player boards and stuff and I go, okay, yeah, that's straight from like Joan of Arc. Like it even looks almost very close resemblance to the player boards in that kind of a more streamlined version. And the idea with this one, again, being that Lucky Duck Games is a part of this, the rules were super light in Chronicles of Crime. It was easy to get to the table. It was easy to have fun. It was easy to get really in depth with it. And it seems like what they're doing here is they're breaking this all out into like sessions or kind of an ongoing story campaign. So you can kind of go at this from a couple different angles, apparently. So you can see here per session, they're saying 120 to 150 minutes. 14 plus and 1 to 3 players. So again, centric to solo play right from the gates. You don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to be. It is, which is awesome. And that's kind of another reason why I thought it was worth mentioning about the 1.5 Kickstarter, because some people might be interested more so now because of that. Going to the FAQ here, this is the important one that you guys are wondering about. What about the solo mode? So in the solo mode, you compete with time and a series of events simulating the actions of the opponents. Since there are 3 completely different characters with unique destinies in each scenario, you may enjoy each a scenario in solo mode at least 3 times. So basically what they're saying there is that you're going to be able to potentially enjoy the same scenario multiple times over because of the stories that get presented to you based on the characters that you're controlling. So of course, if you're having 3 people around the table playing the game, all 3 of the destinies are being fulfilled at once. Whereas if you're playing solo, you're actually able to replay it that many times over because you're only controlling one of the characters. So that's kind of interesting in that you could get multiple plays through of this before you have to move on. And that's pretty cool. So again, moving on down, they're going to again go exactly the same way they did with Chronicles of Crime. They got the scan in place. You're going to be scanning cards. The app is going to be giving you questions that you're going to have to answer. This is going to have that RPG feel of you moving through the game. It's story driven. This is something also worth mentioning, but it's very, very obvious, especially the last half of 2019, that story-driven games have taken a front seat on Kickstarter. It's really been kind of a very strong narrative story-driven kind of world in the last while on Kickstarter. I've noticed a lot of games. It's almost like they were being put together last year and stuff like this, and then finally kind of making their approach now. But I'm noticing that there's a lot of them. It's really good because narrative and story games are fantastic. I really do enjoy them, but there is a certain point of saturation, and we might see that by the end of the year that we've kind of tapped the narrative story driven thing out for a bit. It doesn't mean it's going to go away, because I don't think story or narrative can ever truly disappear, but just the amount of them coming out that have that as the major factor may kind of dwindle just a bit as the industry kind of shifts to a different thing that's the new hot. As of right now, it seems like narrative story driven games are the thing. It's just like there's so many to choose from now, and it's not a bad thing. It actually gives people lots of options. So kind of like it. And usually when you say narrative story driven, solo play's typically built in there, because usually a story can actually be played in a solo capacity. So that's what's kind of cool, is most of the games that are coming out are able to be played in a solo capacity, which is awesome. This is really exciting to see that, again, they also are going to have access to a community scenario editor. So again, it just opens things up for the people that are creative, have a passion for the game, and they want to see new scenarios created. They're just giving people the ability to do that. That's awesome. I love it when a creator kind of creates a game, but then also, you know, kind of like what they would do with a video game at times, where they have an engine that they basically say, here you go, here are the keys, do with it as you will. And, you know, the things that some people create sometimes are pretty incredible. So again, it does say here, while Destinies is a fully standalone game, some of its new content's fully compatible with the original, and we will provide all pledges extra scenarios and boss cards needed to play with them. That's pretty awesome. So you got that cross compatibility with the two. So another reason to kind of, is it something that interests you or not? And of course, the link there to that. Here's a breakdown of what you're going to get. You're going to have map tiles, player boards, Destiny cards, items, coins, dice. The dice are really cool looking, actually. Skill markers, all kinds of great stuff. You even get some compatible content miniature-wise, which is sweet, because, of course, again, any miniatures coming over are going to be able to be used on the opposite side. So pretty awesome there. We've got Myth and Folklore, an expansion that looks like it's kind of unlocking as it goes along. So more stuff here. Stretch goals. These are free for all backers. All kinds of stuff going on here. So again, I just love the fact that it's cross-compatible, because it's just opening up doors for future things. And I really do think that the solo community is going to jump on this one, and it's going to create something special, because, like I said, with the 1.5 Kickstarter, the ability to do that is there, because the rules have actually stated that they have that solo and co-op thing kind of already in place. And that's going to make things a lot easier, because people aren't guessing as to what they should be doing with the rules. So anyway, this is a pretty high-level overview of the game. There's a lot here. So in a nutshell, that is the Time of Legends Destinies Kickstarter. Hopefully it gives you a general idea of how this kind of fits in with the Joan of Arc Kickstarter that's currently ongoing. You'll also notice that in terms of the hours to go, there's not that much time left. So I'm not giving you too much time to make a decision on this one, that's for sure. So I do apologize for that. Timing there didn't work out. But remember that with most of these ones, you can go in as per the FAQ here, I believe, and you're able to go and pledge for $1. And from there, you can have access to the Pledge Manager. So sometimes if you don't have enough time to research something, it can be worth the extra buck just to get into the Pledge Manager, just to have that ability to kind of research and be sure of your choice and all that good stuff. I think you can do that with Destinies. You can also do it with the original Joan of Arc 1.5 that's currently going too, as both of those time is ticking away on. So hopefully this helps. Let's move on to the next one. Next one on the list here is called Hunted. It's always cool to find these small Kickstarters for a game that's designated just to be solo, especially when it says a solo game right in it. I love finding or stumbling upon these, because sometimes I hear nothing about them. I don't even know they exist, and they magically appear on Kickstarter, and I'm like, interesting. Again, I'm not sure on any of these games whether you should back them. I'm never actually doing this video to tell you what you should be backing. The point of the video is to just let you know which ones have caught my attention while skimming through Kickstarter, and which ones have solo, and then kind of giving you an idea as to how much solo they have. Is it baked in from the beginning? Is it just tacked on the side? That type of thing. So you can see in this one, it says it's a solo game from the ground up. So I mean, it's a solo game. It can only be played solo. So it's 20 minutes long, 13 plus, and it's actually got 2 iterations. So what I don't know is the difference. I haven't actually taken a look through this one fully just yet, so I will admit that right now. But it certainly intrigues me, because anything you can play that quick amount of time, it's nice. There's not a lot of games like that. There actually is a lot of games like that, technically, if you actually count them out. But in terms of the amount that are launching on Kickstarter, the majority of them are behemoths, monsters, and they are going to destroy your wallet. These ones are nice because, well, you can pretty much get everything for like $20, which is kind of nice. So in this one, you've got a tower. You're working your way through a massive skyscraper in order to rescue your wife, who's been taken hostage by terrorists. This game is in the series. This game in the series, sorry, uses dice rolling as its core mechanism. Got hunted cards, location cards, 12 tokens, dual layered player boards. Got a bunch of dice. You've got another one here from a mining colony. You'll have to fend off bloodthirsty aliens and get back to your spaceship before the colony self-destructs. Okay then, so that doesn't sound good. Right now, for some weird reason, I'm in this like alien thing. I don't know what it is. This is completely off topic, but recently I started playing Alien Isolation in VR, and it's actually a mod for a game that's a fantastic game. Alien Isolation is fantastic on its own right, but now this person basically created a VR mod for it to allow you to actually be inside the spaceship and have the alien come after you. It's literally terrifying, but it's so much fun. And of course, the more you play it, the less scared you get. But the first few times, or I don't even know if I've ever really gotten 100% used to it yet. The first few times that thing comes after you, like, it's full on terrifying. So from that game, and then shortly afterwards playing Nemesis, like, I don't know what it is, but right now the alien thing, I'm starting to wonder whether it's making a comeback here. I'm going to start seeing a whole bunch of alien based games because it's a really cool, that survival horror thing is something I really love. I don't know why, it's like baked into me. I just love it. It's the feeling of just like not having much at your disposal but trying to survive. I don't know what it is. I enjoy it. And I even enjoy board games, and that's essentially what a lot of these are like. This one seems kind of like that on a much smaller scale. So again, interesting. I'm not too familiar with this one. I can't say whether or not it's good, but it looks like some people from the industry have made comments on it, so that's good. It's good to see it's gotten some videos going forward here. Actually, there's quite a few, so that's good. It's good. I completely missed the boat on this one. I didn't even know this thing was in the pipeline, but it would have been interesting to check it out for sure. Oh, look at that! They got some fancy double-sided playmats. That's nice. Like that. Got some artwork. Although I don't know. I don't know. I like the black on that, but from a design perspective, I would highly recommend that they actually put a picture behind some of this stuff because I think it looks a little too plain. I love the art, and the art, they need to make more of a focus on the art behind this black playmat somehow, like a huge picture or something, maybe one giant shot and all this stuff is see-through. I don't know. Long story short, it's not an expensive one. It's certainly one worth looking into to see whether or not it kind of scratches an itch, or potentially is a great filler for you if you're looking for a game that's quick and something you can pull out, maybe bring with you on trips and stuff like that. Could be of interest. Next up is Oathsworn Into the Deepwood, a grand 1 to 4 player dark fantasy board game, epic story, brand new mechanics, and giant monsters. This comes from Shadowborn Games. It's their first Kickstarter ever, and I can guarantee you, based on this dollar value, it is not going to be their last, because this was an insanely successful Kickstarter from day number one. And they have 8,000 plus backers behind this project. There's a lot going on here. Now, again, for those of you that are not familiar with this game, it's the first time you're ever hearing about it. I did do 2 videos on the channel, one covering chapter number 1 narrative and the chapter number 1 encounter, at least an overview of the encounter, as I didn't want to spoil the majority of that first encounter. I really feel like this is a game that you really need to play yourself. This is not something that's worth kind of blowing the doors off of an encounter to show you everything, as it will make that whole encounter for you, seeing as it's the very first one you'll run into, a lot less fun if you know exactly what's going to happen. What's crazy, though, is that even if you replayed the same encounter and came through it a second time, the behavior of the actual, in this case, brood mother from that encounter in chapter number 1, she's right on the box itself. So again, it's not much of a spoiler per se, because it's right there in front of you, even on the box cover, but the behavior is going to very much be reactionary based on how many dice you're taking off her as you try to take her down. You've also got a turn where she specifically starts attacking back at you. You're moving through a phased, or I should say a staged deck of cards that are going to change as you hit her over time. She's going to become progressively more kind of irate, basically. So at the beginning, she's attacking you. It's pretty devastating even in the first stage, but it just gets even more aggressive as she goes along. And I really like that because it's more of a kind of it's a very reactionary system. It's very balanced in that what you're doing to her, she will do back to you. But the crazy thing is, you don't know what that is going to entail until it happens, and that's kind of part of the fun. There's times where you'll have your warriors right up against her and you'll be swinging your swords trying to take her down, and then all of a sudden she pulls a card that says she's going to tail whip everybody beside her, and you thought being right up against her was a brilliant move for the next turn because you were in place to take another sword attack. Well, she just whipped you guys and knocked you back a bunch of spaces, and your plans have all shattered, and then she's moving and she like picks up and runs away or something, and it's like, and she leaves a wall of rats behind, and you're like, okay, well, I had that planned, and then she did this, and now we've got to recreate, so every round that goes by, you're just constantly kind of recreating a strategy as a team, or if you're playing solo, it's even more fun from the standpoint that you get to fully control the strategy from like every angle, trying to figure out how to take this thing down. It's just so much fun. I enjoyed it so much. There's no other way to say it. So basically, the gist of the game is you're going to be going through, if my understanding is correct, and it doesn't change too much chapter to chapter. I'm sure there's lots of surprises because there's mystery boxes involved in the game, but you move from chapter to chapter, and every chapter is going to, I believe, at the very end, going into the encounter, is going to have a box that you get to open up. It's going to kind of move you into an event or a battle or some kind of main game element that'll put you on one of these boards right here where you're going to have to battle something, and it's a result of whatever the heck you're doing in the story as you move through it. The first part is, say, chapter number 1 starts, for those of you that are unfamiliar with this and haven't watched my videos. Chapter number 1 starts, it's going to give you a backstory, it's going to give you a map like this, it's going to have tokens that are going to drop on the map based on the actual app itself and your choices. You'll go interact with them, you'll make choices, you'll gain things, lose things, like the narrative's going to take you through a whole bunch of steps that's going to really give you a reason to care, essentially, about what you're doing. So that eventually, when you get to the end of that first chapter, for instance, as you saw in my video, then you move into what's called the encounter, and based on your choices from the chapter number 1, there are some things that carry over, and it's not just simplistic stuff like, oh, I got a couple cool tokens from the narrative choices. Yeah, that's there. But there's other stuff like, oh, the actual chapter narrative told me that we saw X about something that's really nasty that's going to come after us, and you learn kind of something about your enemy almost in advance. And then that allows you, when you actually open up the box, the mystery box in the encounter, to have almost like pre-known knowledge of some element of what you're going up against, so that when you create your ability deck, which is like your custom deck for your character that you're going to be able to bring a number of cards into based on the ones you have unlocked from previous chapters, you can strategically stage your deck to go up against that enemy. So for instance, if you find out through the narrative somehow that this thing is going to involve fire, let's say, or whatever, then you can tailor your character's cards to be able to, maybe you want a lot of movement because there's going to be like a lot of fire to deal with, or maybe you need the ability to run up a tree or run down another tree. Like there's some crazy stuff going on in this one. Like these trees right here, at least in my prototype, they were flat, but I believe the miniatures version of this game allows for them to be full on trees. But essentially, if you have a character like this sitting right beside the tree, like he can play a card for some animus, which is these gems right here. He moves them from slot to slot, and basically can climb up a tree and then basically pop down beside a tree on the opposite side of the board and start hacking and slashing stuff. And it's just like, it's cool that the terrain is not just necessarily there to block hexes. Like it's not just generically, here, drop the terrain, this blocks 3 hexes, and that's about it. You can't shoot through it. Done. That's pretty much every attack combat type base game in a dungeon crawl ever. This one actually has interactions with those unique items that are on the map. So like I said, like you can have a character literally climb up a map or climb up a tree and then drop down on another tree over here, and it's like it totally impacts the gameplay because like you have freedom of movement, you have freedom of strategy. You're not just locked to, well, I'm here and I can only move 2 or 3 spaces. What should I do? There's 3 different options. Like there's more than that. There's more in your hand. And there's some cards that have you do things like if you're against a tree, you can dash to the other tree, or again, there's going to be more elements, as you can see, within the game than just trees. But that's just an example of what I saw in the prototype. So it's really cool to see that they're kind of thinking outside the box with the combat, and they're not just kind of keeping you restricted to, you have X amount of movement and that's it. So, good luck, try to find a good position. There's other ways to kind of go about this. So much to say about this one. I'm going to probably go on for way too long, but this is because I have more in-depth knowledge of this one, being that I played it. One of the another cool factor that I really liked is this dice versus cards aspect, and it's you really do get a choice going into combat. Do I want to use cards or do I want to use dice? And some people are just predestined to choose dice because they just love epic rolls or they just love poorly rolling. But it's fun that you can switch out or switch back in. So you could be playing one night and you're rolling dice and you feel like you're just hitting criticals all the time. Everything's going your way. You just want to keep using those dice. I've had that type of gameplay before with this off camera. I've also had games where things have gone so poorly that I had to stop rolling dice and I had to start using cards only, because dice just don't always guarantee those positive results, and there's no way to count or manipulate the dice besides re-rolling the die, which is a token you can obtain until you lose them all trying to re-roll. But you can only re-roll a die once. That's another key factor, no matter how many tokens you have. So when you have cards, you can actually choose to say, I want to go ahead, I'm making an attack, I can roll up to 10 dice, I need to try to get as much damage on this thing as I possibly can. You can choose how much damage you really want to do. It's all based on, it's all based on the percentage of chance you have to hit in the first place. But the cool thing with cards is, once you flipped a card over from that yellow deck, so you have these yellow dice, they all have 6 sides. You have a yellow deck that's comprised exactly with the same odds, or I shouldn't say odds, but the same chance of getting the same sides on a die, in terms of like everything's evened out. I don't know how to explain that exactly correct words wise. I'm doing a really poor job of that. Basically, think of they've basically taken a die and they translate it to a deck of cards and had it be equal. So what happens is, if you choose to use the cards, as you use the cards, you're going to be discarding those yellow cards. So say, for instance, there's 6 nulls or 6 blanks in that yellow deck, and you go ahead and say, I'm going to use some cards in this attack and some dice. You roll the dice, you get some decent results, you pull some cards, and you pull 3 cards, and they're all nulls. They're all blanks. So you immediately miss, because 2 or more blanks, and you miss the attack unless you have rerolls or ways to mitigate it, which are ways to do that. But essentially what you have now is you have knowledge now, because it's similar. It has that aspect that like Gloomhaven implemented with its like skill deck, where you're kind of like, flipping cards. You can kind of card count. If you've got those numbers in your brain, you can kind of guess the odds, or sometimes even know the odds, just based on the cards that you've literally put out on the table. So you can sit there and say, well, I've removed 3 blanks from the deck, so there's technically only 3 blanks left. So automatically, my odds of using the cards at this point are better than using the dice. So from this point, I should probably start using the cards, at least until they fail me. And things like that. So you can make those kind of choices. And of course, there'll be a certain point where that doesn't make sense anymore, and you'll flip-flop back to dice or do a little bit of both. But I love that. I love the ability to choose which way you want to go, because sometimes it just is so satisfying to let the dice decide. And other times you just want to guarantee you at least get some damage on the thing. And you've got preemptive knowledge of what's in that, potentially what's in that yellow deck in terms of the odds of getting it. So very cool. I like it. It just gives you more options on attacking, rather than just saying, here's your deck, or here's your dice. May the dice be with you. Because we all know that doesn't necessarily always happen very well. So a lot of people have been involved in the project, which is pretty cool to see. A lot of involvement, a lot of good. It seems like the majority of the community seems to think this game has good legs, and that's really saying something for it. I do believe it does. Of course, I haven't seen anything beyond the Kickstarter prototype, but just the structure alone gives me a lot of hope. You can see here the story here is 30 to 60 minutes. The encounter is 90 to 20. So if you're talking about a chapter, at least the meat of the middle of the game is replayable for a number of reasons in my mind. First off, the encounter does not play the same every single time. I've played that encounter 4 times recently, and every single time I played against this broodmother, the whole situation and strategy changed. Everything was different. I had games where I rolled epically and did super well. I had games where I did super poor and got absolutely just thrashed out of the gates type thing. I had games that were very evenly matched, back and forth, back and forth. But everything was exactly as it states here in terms of how many minutes it took to play. But it was just like, it was so cool to see that my actual choices inside the encounter, as well as the reactionary kind of thing of the actual monster you're attacking, really did add that kind of back and forth mentality where it's like, yeah, I'm going after you, I've got your flank, I'm taking your flank down, but then the flank is down, which means you got to pull another stage card. You got to see what happens. Boom, she does something back to you. Sometimes you can get lucky if you're in the right position. You may not get affected, but these are big miniatures you're fighting, so typically you're usually going to get bumped around quite a bit. And when you got minions like mice running around and stuff like that, like there's just so much going on, and it's a lot of fun. It really is. And what I also really appreciate about the actual game rules themselves is that the majority of the major and most important rules, like line of sight and how do you determine which miniatures move and where, that has been so simplified down that you almost can't screw it up. And that's what I like. There's a lot of games that really overcomplicate line of sight and in which miniatures move first. They have very simplistic, high-level golden rules that are like, do this in every situation. And it's just like, bam. And all of a sudden, the 12 mice that are sitting on the board that look like it'd be a lot to manage in almost every other game you've ever played before literally take seconds to move. It's like nothing, like at all. And of course, it might take you that first time to get used to it, but once you've got that first time down, no problem at all. So anyway, long story short, this is a really interesting one. Like this to me is one that I've been looking forward to all year. I think this is going to be one of the most successful Kickstarters of the year. I think for solo players, if you're looking for a game that is going to be an epic campaign, that's going to like something that you don't already have in your collection, like it does things that some other games just don't do at all. And then it does some things that are the same as other games, but much better. So it's kind of like, for those people that say, well, I've got games like this already in my collection, yeah, you might, but to not to this level, I don't think. And again, like the scale of these miniatures, they're larger, they're really well done, and the miniature box inside of this is ridiculous. I'll go down here just a little bit further so we can, because we've talked about majority of these components. But here's the terrain, for instance. Now, this looks minor. This looks really small. These are huge. Like, these are big, chunky miniatures. You got, like, 185 millimeter Deepwood trees, 135 millimeter house. Like, these are big things to really impact the game itself. And again, there's going to be actual gameplay built in, even with the cards and ability cards themselves that use these things, whether it be to your advantage or probably your detriment if you have AI cards that bounce off them too. So very, very cool. Lots of stuff here. You got different maps. You got secret boxes, metal coins, armory, all kinds of stuff. This is really cool. So I didn't actually even realize this originally, but like I just thought it was a really cool idea. But like you've always played through these campaign games and you switch up your weapons and stuff like this, but you literally can. You literally pop the arms off, put them on. I know there's people that are big into putting magnets, like really small mini magnets, like KDM is a good example. People have said like, hey, I got like 15 armor sets and I want to be able to swap stuff out any moment. This does it, and you don't need magnets. It's literally just pop them off, pop them on, pop them off, pop them on. It's perfect. And in my opinion, these types of dungeon crawl games that have miniatures, that have weapons, any game where you're able to flip-flop your weapons, every single one of them needs to move to this. They all should be like this. You should always be allowed to change the customization and look of your character. I find it silly that they make a casted mold for one character and then they say, well, your actual gameplay is going to have you use 19 weapons by the time you're done the game, but you have to just look at that guy with a sword the whole time. Like, to me, it's just... And it's the reason why so many people visually can't handle it and have to put magnets on it. And I can understand that. So all kinds of stretch goals going on. Of course, they're not going to have any issues cracking stretch goals, which they have. They've added more individuals in. They've added more encounters, more phases, like new mystery encounter box, including scale miniatures. There's all kinds of stuff being thrown in this thing. Craziness. And I believe, yeah, they switched to a daily unlock. So they're going to have things unlocking every single day, making the encounter really fun to just be a part of. But it's cool. You've got, everything here you need essentially in order to try to figure out whether or not this game is for you. My playthroughs are right here. Yes, beware of spoilers. They did mention this here because, again, I am going through the Chapter 1 narrative as it literally is. There probably won't be too many changes to it. Again, though, if you played through that narrative, you might go at it at a different angle, and there actually is changes there. So again, that goes back to that replayability talk that I had earlier when I was talking with Skyrim. It's like, yeah, you might cover the main story to go from A to Z, but how you got from A to Z is not straight through A to Z. It's kind of a zigzag. And you might, go to different locations before you went to another one, and that might result in something different. Or you might not go to a location, go to an alternate one, and you might never see a particular location. And I had that actually even happen in mine, where I didn't get to see every single location. Happens. And that might be enough over the course of a 15 chapter plus game where you go, you know what, there's enough of this that I didn't see that I want to play this through again to see what those elements were that I missed. Kind of fill in that story. There's the encounter right there. And again, this is going to talk about a lot of things I talked about in terms of, do you want to use dice? Do you want to use cards? Once the cards are out, you can determine which ones hit for criticals, which have these little like highlights around the edges and stuff like that. The battle flow system, I never even mentioned this. This is like the meat and potatoes of the game. Really, it's really important because not only are you playing a card for its major ability on the card in the center and paying enemies for it, but it has a cooldown slot in the top right-hand corner that tells you which slot it should be in. 0 is right here, 3, then 2, and then 1. So basically it kind of cycles from the furthest point around all the way over, but some cards you play from your hand might be cooldown 1, so it actually drops into this area right here. Yeah, so you saw it, like if a card drops up here is a better example. So when a card drops in here, not when it moves over, but when it drops in from your hand, like that, all the cards that are in that position shuffle over to that side. That's kind of how battle flow happens. So you'll notice every time a card comes out of the hand here in this graphic, it's pushing the cards in that position one spot over. And that's essentially how you're basically pushing the cards around your player board back up into your hand. Because once they hit the 0, then in the refresh phase, anything sitting in this slot comes back up into your hand. And that's essentially what you're doing. And Animus here is what you're using to actually get these cards onto the table. You got the Animus cost like 3, 4, whatever. That's you're using this. Regen is going to happen every time you refresh, that type of thing. It's really interesting. It's quick, it's easy, it's snappy. Honestly, the rules in the game, that was one of the reasons why I gravitated towards it and liked it so much, was that, it doesn't overcomplicate things. I like to compare this to, well, I don't know. You can compare it to a number of different games, but it doesn't go down the road that a lot of these games go down, where you're just buried in finicky rules. It strips everything unnecessary out and leaves the fun in, so that you're focused on the battle flow, you're focused on landing crits, you're focused, like, it's all the fun. It's almost like the highlight reel of everything you want to see in the encounters, what the focus is. And a lot of games don't do that well. They have the highlights in there, but it's buried in amongst a whole bunch of fidgety things that just suck the life right out of the game. So that was cool. As you can see here, solo friendly. So this is, again, mentioned in my videos. I thought this is awesome. But basically, you can go ahead and you can play this in a solo capacity without having to control full 4 blown characters. You have to have 4 characters in your party. But what's awesome is that you can just say, forget it. I don't want to deal with 4 decks of cards and all the items and all the whatever. I just want to be able to move through this at a faster pace. I'm going to control 1 full character and 3 companion characters like this. All you have to deal with an exile, for instance, in a companion situation, is he gets 2 cards like this. You got your defense value here. You got your HP. You got your might. You got your regen of your animus, or your animus, I should say, and that is always going to be 2, as it mentions right here. So it's very easy to use it and quickly just get past the turn. You got 2 major abilities on your card. Usually it's moving and attacking. And then you got 2 special abilities behind it. And then the only thing that changes between a companion and a full character is that the companion uses some tokens differently. Again, if you want to see that, check out my encounter overview video. It'll make a lot more sense. But the idea is all of this. They tried to solve problems that everybody has with these epic, massive campaign games. Like, someone didn't show up for a session. Well, this is exactly how you can continue having fun. Someone new turned up. Go ahead and generate a new character. Do the leveling system and you're good. Not a lot of time. You can split it up. You can do a story, be done. Do an encounter later, be done. You don't have to do everything together. They're 2 separate pieces of a full-length chapter. If you're not into the story, this is a huge one. If you don't want to be kind of like into the story as much, you want to jump right to the action because maybe the particular people you're playing with are just not the type to want to move through a narrative, then there's an instant action mode, which they talk about more on the Kickstarter page as well. Paperwork, you got quick save bags, setup time. So again, and they're going to have like the game tray thing in there. So they're thinking about all the things that, you know, drive players, whether it be solo or even with other players, away from a game over time. You know, and especially with campaign games, that's one of the biggest factors, is like these things are massive. They take a lot of time. The setup is a lot. You start a campaign with 3 friends and they ditch after 2 chapters, and then the game sits on the shelf forever. Not the case with this one. This one has avenues to enjoy this thing in a solo capacity, in a streamlined approach, so you can get this in a table and enjoy it. And this is why I think it's moving towards the type of, and I don't even know if I want to call this a dungeon crawler, but it kind of has that element because it's about a half and half narrative, half dungeon. But basically, it's pushing those games forward in a positive direction by, you know, kind of streamlining that stuff, which I like. I like heavy games. I like kind of a lot of rules in some games for some, as long as they make sense to be there. This is a game where it doesn't make sense to overload it. And I think they did a really good job of balance overall. So that's all I'm going to say about Oathsworn. Although when I say that's all I'm going to say, this is probably by far going to be the longest segment for a game on the video. Basically, pretty much almost losing my voice. But I have a lot of experience with this one, being that I played the Kickstarter prototype, as I mentioned. So this is the one that I have the most kind of knowledge at the top of my head. So hopefully that helps and maybe adds a couple more thoughts than you heard from the videos themselves, as I'm not kind of speaking freely. But I really, really, really recommend that if you're a solo player and you're looking to add a narrative kind of epic story campaign into your collection, that you take a serious hard look at Oathsworn. And that's going to conclude rolling on Kickstarter for October 2019. I really hope this helps you make an informed decision on some Kickstarters that you may be interested in. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.